Hello and welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a conversation of ideas. And who better to discuss ideas with than Amitabh Kant, currently playing an integral role in India's G20 presidency as G20 Sherpa, after of course being in charge of the NITI Aayog, and much more during his career as a civil servant. He's also managed to find time to write his latest book, Made in India, 75 Years of Business and Enterprise. Mr. Kant, thanks so much for being on the NDTV Dialogues.
Great pleasure.
What to you, sir, is the big idea in your book? You've, of course, looked at the last 75 years from colonialization. But today, in 2023, what's the big idea for India? We're already in Davos, it's been called India's decade, Asia's century. All these terms bandied about, but are we ready to capitalize on it?
Yeah, so the big idea is about private sector, and that if India is to grow at very high rates and really transform itself in one generation, private sector has to be the key driver of growth and of the economy. And the government has to retreat itself in a vast range of areas and focus only on social sectors, that is education, health, nutrition. But in a range of areas where government over the years, in the last 75 years has gotten, it'll have to take a back seat. In fact, the entire book is about 75 years of business. We were having about close to 25% of the global GDP share when colonization started in India. By the time of independence, it had come down to just 5%. Now we are trying to accelerate the pace as we grow across a range of areas. And this would require us to do a vast range of technological leapfrogging, which we've done in many areas. We've made ourselves very easy and simple in doing business. We've scrapped a number of rules, regulation, procedures, and a whole range of laws. But I think there's a vast range of public sector which still exists. There's a mindset issue, and there's a bureaucratic change issue also, that especially in the states of India, that private sector has to be given a much larger role to create wealth. And only when they create wealth will India be able to grow at very rapid rates, as has happened in many other countries which have transformed themselves in the last 3 to 4 decades.
No, it's fascinating you say that, because of course we are in the countdown to 2024, and the private sector is an area where there's often a trust deficit. I mean, you've seen that the opposition attacks right now is on private sector companies. So private sector and its role in India's growth, providing jobs in India's economy, why is it such an area which, as you pointed out, there's still some hesitancy over?
Yeah. So, you know, I've worked in Kerala, and where every political party strongly believes that government must be in business. There are, in fact, the public sectors are growing and expanding rather than retreating. But that's why I thought I must write this book, because my belief is whichever country has grown for a very long period of time, over a 3 to 4 decade period at high rates, private sector has played a very key role in creating in doing infrastructure and creating wealth. But the government has set the right policy framework, and it's very important that in all these areas, if we move from British Raj to License Raj for a very long period of time, post 91 we grew, and again post 2014, in each of the areas that we've grown, it's grown because the private sector has done a great role. Secondly, I wanted to emphasize a very critical role of the foreign direct investment, because it brings in technology, it ensures that there's competition across sectors, and there's a very critical key role of exports, because Indian businesses must compete in the global market. The value which you get in the international market is much higher than what you get domestically, and therefore you have to become a very integral part of global supply chains. And if you have to penetrate a global market, that means that all these major areas, all these sunrise areas of growth, there will be some components which need to be imported, and then you need to do value addition to that, and then export into the markets, and export at the least cost. And therefore you have to become a very productively efficient economy.
No, so I wanted to ask on when you talk about that, do you think like when you mentioned social security, health, etc., that the areas, for instance, where the government must be in, for instance, in providing education, but then the variance that we see across states on the delivery of these social benefits, welfare schemes, and that's been really the big change we've seen because of the amount of scale we've managed to achieve in providing welfare schemes. Now, if the government goes away, and I think that remains the worry, that the whole kind of issue of profit as the bottom line as versus public good.
Yeah, so the government has a very key role to play in policy framing. It has a very key role to play in education, in health, in nutrition, all these areas. It has a very major role to play. And why it's very important is because our learning outcomes must take a radical jump up, our health outcomes must go up. We've done the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, and one of the key things, even on health insurance, we've done remarkable work. And one of the key transformations that has happened in India is really about this huge digital public infrastructure that we've built up, our ability to have been able to provide digital identity, bank accounts. Between 2015 and 2017, we've opened close to about 500 million bank accounts, which is like 55% of the bank accounts opened in the world were opened in India. So all that has enabled us to do direct benefit transfers straight. When I was a young officer, there used to be vast leakages, huge amount of leakages, but today we put money straight into the bank account of the beneficiaries in 600 schemes, zero leakage. We are doing all fast payments. I mean, I've not used my debit or credit card. We just use our mobile to do, it's become a virtual bank for me. And we do 11x more payment than what America and Europe they do. We do 4x more than what China does in real time. We're doing about 44% of the real time payment in the world. So huge digital transformation in India, and that is the way to take the country forward.
And what's interesting is you write also of how in the districts that's happening, some of the in Jharkhand, in Chhattisgarh, because I think the worry always remains that when we talk about the many different Indias, that often the glitzy picture or the shining picture is only for parts of India, but you're showing that this is happening in the poorest districts of India as well, how this benefits.
So, Sonia, one of my greatest delights of being a civil servant has been that I was able to work on the Aspirational District program, which was driven by the Prime Minister. He didn't call them backward, but these were the most backward districts of India. We called them the Aspirational District, and he wanted real-time monitoring to be done of these districts. So we had about 49 indicators where we were tracking data on a real-time basis on performance. And we were putting out this data on a month-to-month basis and actually coming out with the ranking of districts on how they are performing on outcomes of health, education, nutrition. And we created competition amongst these districts, and these districts have done better than most of the non-aspirational districts in the country. They've jumped up sharply because of ability to use data for good governance. And that, to my mind, is something which has happened big time in India. Our ability to put data, to compete, to rank districts and states, name and shame them, put it out in public domain so that every single citizen knows which state has done well, which district has done well, which block has done well. And that is the best way to take good governance forward.
I want to ask, because of course we've crossed a milestone that India now has is the most populous nation in the world. How does that actually work for us in terms of how do policymakers like yourself, how does the government of India, are we ready for this huge challenge?
Yeah. So I think there's a huge demographic advantage because our population is still very young and it will continue to remain young till we become 147. Our average age will still be about 34, 35. And therefore, you have a huge dependency burden, very low. But the focus has to be on skilling on the right kind of job. The world is transforming itself. The world is transforming itself in totally new areas of growth. So you're seeing electric mobility, you're seeing battery storage, you're seeing mobile manufacturing. A huge amount of disruption is taking place in these areas. You're seeing digital transformation where product development is very hugely important, and therefore you need completely new skilled manpower of the world. And therefore my view is that constantly in both ITIs and IITs and across universities, we need to constantly keep changing our curriculum for what the world demands, because by the time we are 2047, we'll be supplying about close to 25 to 30% of the workforce in a range of areas to the rest of the world.
Is the focus enough on that? Because of course we also, as the IMF has the latest figures show that we are the fastest growing economy, but when the comparison to China and some other key indices, India still has a way to go, especially of course in the size of the economy. But on this, China immediately reacted to these population figures by saying we still have the largest number of skilled workers. So is that going to be India's big challenge? Have we woken up to that?
No, so a lot of work has been done on skilling, and I think the government created the new Ministry of Skilling. A huge amount of work has been done through NSDC. Large amount of work has been done, but I think we need to unleash again the ability to do private sector skilling in a very big way. There's a young startup called Scalar, which trains people in a whole range of new areas of growth, and you get about, after you've been through that 1-year course with Scalar, your ability to earn goes up by about 10x. So what it really demonstrates is that new startups, a whole range of new areas of growth, are looking for good product developers. They are getting for good designers, good IT designers. They are looking for great ability for people in, I've been talking to some of these startups in the areas of robotic engineering, drones, etc. They face a huge amount of, still a demand-supply imbalance. So we need to get into those areas for training.
No, of course, and we see the exodus of human capital, and we see the number of students going abroad rising, the number of the foreign exchange that's being paid out, and also the worry that we've seen whether it's illegal migrants now, whether it's from Punjab, Gujarat, reports coming out because of the feeling still that the jobs are not available here. How is the government actually working on mission mode of jobs to people, or even skilling people so they're capable of jobs?
So Sonia, my belief always has been that you will create the right jobs if you keep growing at accelerated pace, including in areas where there is labor intensive growth. So while we need to grow into many sunrise areas of growth, if you look at the production linked incentive scheme, it also focused very strongly on food processing. It focused very strongly on textiles and many other areas of large scale employment, including automobile, etc., which again creates a vast number of jobs. But the important thing there to say is we must get the size and scale of manufacturing right. Many people in India think that, or many intellectuals also think that we should keep growing on services. Not possible. India needs to fire on all cylinders. We need to fire on services, we need to fire on manufacturing, we need to fire on agriculture productivity enhancement in a very big way, and we need to fire also on urbanization. Urbanization will be a very big driver of growth. So that's very important. But important thing to understand is that we still have a lot of informal jobs. 40% of our jobs are still in agriculture. And those are all informal, low-value jobs. So we need to move them into manufacturing, and that's important. So we need to get size and scale of manufacturing. That is what the PLI attempts, and that will enable you to create Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 manufacturers.
One of the big areas of focus has been that given COVID and what happened after that, the world was looking for supply chains which are not so China reliant. Has India stepped up enough in that aspect? Because we've seen Vietnam, we've seen Bangladesh for areas we're talking about, for instance, like garment exports, other exports coming in as a part of that global supply chain. Should India be doing more on this?
So a lot has happened. I mean, you've seen the huge expansion of manufacturing by Apple. We've seen Samsung expanding in a big way. The objective of the production linked incentive scheme was that only, and I think the results will start showing in the coming year. So across automobile, across battery manufacturing, across advanced chemistry cell, across renewables, I think these PLIs have just unfolded. So you will see the size and scale going up, and a lot of more investment coming in the years to come. So I think decoupling is not the right word. There's been a monopolization of manufacturing in China. That's happened with over dependency, and therefore the world is looking for alternative destinations. India is ideally placed because it has skills, it has the domestic demand, it has the capability to produce at the lowest cost, it has a now focused very strongly on ease of doing business, it has focused very strongly on opening up the foreign direct investment. So you will see more and more of investment. We need to accelerate the pace even more, no doubt. But I think the policy measures are all there. One of the good things that happened during the COVID is that you had a series of reforms across GST, IBC, RERA, lowering of the corporate tax, and that should pay the country rich dividend in the coming decade.
What's also interesting is that the focus on India globally, just of course because of our economy, we're the bright spot in the global economy. Everybody's saying it's India's decade, but also diplomatically. I mean, we've seen a huge shift really in India, as seen as the foreign minister has been saying that we no longer believe that the Western models of foreign policy should apply to the world. Do you think India's G20 presidency at this point is key in that, especially given the current Russia-Ukraine perhaps a stalemate which you're having to deal with in various statements as well?
So we've put out a very ambitious agenda. Our priorities are very critical for the world. We talk about accelerated, inclusive and resilient growth because it's important to understand that 1/3 of the world is suffering from actually slowdown of growth. The post-COVID era has seen 200 million people go below the poverty line. So 100 million people have lost their jobs. So you need to accelerate growth. You need to accelerate sustainable development goals. We are midway through that point. Instead of progressing, the world has regressed because of COVID and because of inflation rates in the western part of the world. We also need to push for digital transformation, and what India has done in terms of digital public infrastructure is very unique. If you look around the world, you find that about 4 billion people do not have a digital identity. 2 billion people do not have a bank account. 133 countries do not have fast payments. So much of this model can be replicated in many of the emerging countries of the South. And then one of the key priorities of the Prime Minister also has been women-led development, and I think it's important because in India today the latest NFHS survey shows that there are more women than men in India, and I think they have to become a very important driver of improving learning outcomes, health outcomes, and as drivers of economic growth. It's very, very critical to my mind. It will be very difficult to grow at high rates of 9 to 10% over a long period of time without women being put into leadership positions.
How difficult has it been to balance the Russia-Ukraine tension in India's G20 presidency in the various meetings? We, of course, got the heads of state meeting come up in September. How much of a challenge is this for India and Indian diplomacy and you?
So there is a challenge. A similar challenge was faced by Indonesia last year. And there about 15-16 meetings had failed, but eventually at the final round before the leaders summit, everybody got around. We were able to look at this in a very sane manner and work out a para 3 and 4 of the Bali agreement, which G20 is not a political forum. It's a forum for economic growth, it's a forum for financial progress, and therefore we fell back on the United Nations General Assembly resolution, which is a political forum, and we took the resolution of UN and put it into the Bali resolution, which has stood the test of time. So I'm quite hopeful that as we go along, that same resolution should hold good for India as well.
How hard has it been having them in the same room?
Well, it's been much easier now. Indonesia faced a tough time, but they managed it. Right now, all of them are talking. All of them are mixing with each other. And we are all interacting. And we've done over about 105 meetings now already. And we've had very positive, very constructive, and I think to my mind very lively and very vibrant discussion on a range of substantial issues.
No. Well, as long as nothing was adjourned, that's fantastic. But just to ask, because your book, of course, talks about how far India has come. But of course, in a country, the scale and size of India, and with, as I said, the most populated nation in the world, there are huge, huge challenges ahead. What we've done so far even is not enough. What for you has been the biggest game changer so far, and what is the biggest challenge that lies ahead?
So, to my mind, the biggest game changer has been the digital transformation of India. It's just been enormous in terms of transforming lives of citizens and to create a unique model for the rest of the world. I mean, not merely in terms
An India
of
model.
not merely in terms of the digital public infrastructure. You know, in our ability to do fast payment, our ability to create DigiLocker, our ability to do Diksha and Swayam, our ability to do fast tags, many other areas, and to ensure that there's a digital identity for everyone and that there's a bank account, and the extent of productive efficiency that through the direct benefit transfer that it brought in. I mean, during the COVID period, we were able to put money straight into the bank accounts of 800 million people. So it's been the biggest transformation that the world has ever seen, to my mind. And that's why the Bank of International Settlements said that, you know, India has achieved in 7 years' time what it would have taken it 50 years to achieve. And that has been the biggest landmark achievement.
And the biggest challenge, because the fact, even during COVID, the fact that we saw the exodus of migrants at that time, the shutdown in a sense, it seemed, of the government for them, and also that we still give food grains to 80 crore people.
To my mind, the biggest challenge, as I've said in this book, is to really grow at high rates for a long period. We've grown at high rates for a short period. We need to grow over a 3-decade period at very high rates so that we can create good quality jobs. Jobs are important, and the good quality jobs can't come out of distributing poverty. They have to come from growth, and therefore the growth is the key factor. And when growth takes place, it'll get we need to distribute this across states. And the second critical thing is the states have to now become the key drivers of growth, not just the states in the western part of India, but in eastern part of India. And we've seen the southern part of India doing well, the western part of India doing well. It's very important that the north and east must become the key driver of growth. If these states start growing, because they have low base levels, if they grow at high rates, India will grow for the next 3 decades. And therefore, the growth of states in India, urbanization in India, is 2 critical drivers of growth in the coming years.
Mr. Kant, as I said, this is a conversation of ideas, and fabulous to discuss so many different ideas with you. I'd love to see this in the next few years over how it rolls out, and we'll have you back to discuss it then. Thank you so much for joining me on Dialogues. Thank you.